Hello and welcome to TalkArt. I'm Sally Rain and I will be your host as we delve into the world of the artist and the art that's all around us. TalkArt is sponsored by the Silicon Valley Open Studios. During the first 3 weekends in May, hundreds of local artists open their studios to the public. For more information, you can go to the website svos.org. Our guest, Joe Boissy, is a painter who uses inks and acrylics to create lettering art that has many layers of meaning in its beautiful colors. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Sally.
So Joe, tell us a little bit, what exactly is lettering art? Is it calligraphy or is it something different?
Well, calligraphy itself is a very complex and controversial word these days. In reality, lettering is anything that has to do with letters. So when I was even young, before even I started writing, my parents used to tell me I used to do calligraphy. I used to copy things without even understanding what it means. So lettering art meaning the love of letters and incorporating letters into any art that you do. It doesn't have to be a 2D art. It doesn't have to be a painting. It can be a sculpture. It can be a thing. So that in lettering arts is incorporating letters. And letters doesn't necessarily mean the ABC that we know in Western world. It can be any calligraphic mark, something, a gesture, a symbol, or any mark. That's lettering art.
Interesting. And so you use letters that are not necessarily from English or French, as you were French?
Yeah. I studied, in fact, Western calligraphy, but also studied a lot of other calligraphy. And most recently, I spent almost a year studying undeciphered script. Undeciphered scripts are scripts that were created many, many years ago, like the hieroglyphics and things like that. But there are a lot of scripts today, as we speak, that we still don't know how to read them. Like, for example, there's a linear A, which was discovered in the island of Crete. There's something called the rongo, something called the Indus scripts. All these scripts, we can detect them, we can understand, but we don't understand what it means. We can see these are the marks, these are the symbols, but we don't know what it means. And so I use that, and I transform them in a calligraphic way, and I incorporate that into my art.
Oh, very interesting. And so that's part of the layers of meaning, that some of the meaning, there is no meaning.
Exactly.
We don't know what it is.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Very interesting. So you've created a piece that is a poster that uses a lot of different words.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at the process that you came up with that. Let's
Yes.
take a look at those images now.
Yeah, so this piece was in fact a poster called Ephemer. Ephemer was in fact a dance show, local dance show here. And the organizer of the show asked me to design the poster for them, the logo. So I started with the layout that you can see here. This layout, in fact, was of a dancer, and it was a dance, obviously, as you can see, it's like a hip-hop dancer. But then my next quest was, how can I incorporate letters into that? So I started doing sketching after sketching, and the letters that you see here are not random letters. They are, in fact, the lyrics of the songs that are within that they used in the show.
Oh, wow.
So that helped me do a sketch after sketch, trying, in fact, with a pencil and paper. And then finally, after trying many different layers and many different trials, I ended up with a final sketch. And then what I do is I scan all that, put it in the computer, and then render the final poster from it that you can see right now.
Oh, wow. That's really different. Very interesting.
The reason you need to do it by computer is because it gives you the possibility to expand it and to put it in a large format. It goes, because you transform it into vector art, you can transform it in a much bigger scale, put it like a large poster.
Very interesting. So you scanned it in and then you created the vector art. Oh, cool. And now this is much more abstract.
Yeah, this is much more abstract. In fact, this is an Indus script that you see here within that piece. And the pieces that you see here are pieces, again, with ink and paper, but the very same process, the very same thought process, and the way we look at how to put the composition of the letters, you can use this very same thing on canvas as well. So this is a woman with a bright idea, and you can see that there's a script around it, and it tells you a story about the idea that she has, but it's undeciphered. So I don't know, maybe you know what that idea is.
And the woman herself looks like script.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
And this one is a man with a charming, in fact, a recipe. and people can see a man with his, trying to decipher something. Again, this is another undeciphered script that I used here.
So this is an actual script that you've used symbols from.
The one that you see, in fact, the red piece, the red part on the left side of the piece is, in fact, an undeciphered script that I used here on purpose, because I don't know what that recipe is. I would love someone to tell me what it is. And that's kind of the mystique and the kind of the atmosphere that you'd like to put each time. And this one has what we call hand-drawn letters, which is a very meticulous time, taking really your time in drawing every single letter in the process.
So inside the black and around. So there are letters everywhere.
Yes, letters everywhere. But it doesn't mean, Sally, that I'm looking and I'm seeking legibility. Sometimes people can decipher things, can read things. Sometimes I can't read what I wrote. And that's the beauty of the process, because the whole idea is to build something that creates mystery, mystique, intrigue, so you can play with it as much as you can.
Interesting. Very gestural as well.
Yeah. This is a combination of using brushes and also very tiny, minute, small, either pens or quills or different types of tools that allow you to do this thing. And most of them are black and white, but you have also the possibility of adding color.
And so what media do you use for these?
Most of the time I use a variety of inks, and then for the color, it's either acrylic inks or acrylic paint. In fact, it depends on the media and depends on the support I'm using. If it's on canvas or on paper or on board, depends on the type of use that I'm using underneath.
Yeah, so those are beautiful. And so you brought some tools to show us how you create this, and you have a whole bunch of tools.
Yes.
So why don't you bring those out and show us what you have, because these are fascinating.
You can see there's a lot of tools here, and a lot of them here. And you probably have either never seen tools like this because they don't look like pens, but they are, in fact, writing tools or marking tools, maybe a better way of describing it. And some of them are machine-made, like these things. This one is called, for example, an automatic pen. And you can see it's two pieces of metal that link together. And when you dip it in ink, it gets through this possibility of creating thin lines or thick lines. But you have like ruling pens, like this one, which is the same process. Used to be a long time ago by architects. We don't use it anymore because architects use computers. But in the old days, that was a typical tool for drawing.
Can I see that one? That's very interesting.
Yeah. And I have tools that are even more interesting, and these are tools that are completely handmade. I made these tools from scratch, and this is something we call either a folded pen or a cola pen.
Cola pen.
A cola pen. And the cola pen, the process or the principle is the same. You take a can of Coke, you cut it into the aluminum piece of it, you fold it.
Cola.
Yeah,
so
cola.
That's why you say cola.
That's a Coca-Cola pen, if you like.
Right.
And the idea is that when you have that process, now you have the possibility of having very thin lines when you use the point of that pen, or you maybe broad edge when you go into that part of the pen. And that gives you the flexibility within the same tool in order to make that.
And there's a space in between that holds the ink?
Exactly. That's the reservoir, if you like, where you can get the ink, in fact, in between the thing. Yeah. And maybe the best way to show you that is to use these tools now in front of you on a piece of paper, and then we can go into that. So that's another one, also handmade. And I'm going to use a regular ink here. It's called Shoreline Gold, but it's not gold. In fact, it's orange. And we're going to do some people, again, call it lettering art, calligraphy, etc. Would you like me to write something special? Do you have something in mind?
You go ahead. You choose.
Okay, why don't we start with ABC or something like that. So
something recognizable first.
So people understand this is an A, or this is a B, or this is a C, etc. This is an A, B, C, D. And this is like a very, loose handwriting. It doesn't have to be complicated.
So have you developed your own style of calligraphy?
In fact, every lettering artist, every calligrapher would have to, at one point in time, develop your own style. It is derived, obviously, from one particular thing. But the style that you develop, in fact, changes, and you want to adapt to what you're looking for. You learn what we call hands, what type of lettering you're doing. But at the end of the day, you can use the same hand for a variety of things. There is something to talk about what I'm writing, and there's something to talk about what I mean in my writing. For example, I can put good morning, and it doesn't look like good morning. It may look like good evening, and vice versa.
Right.
So that's the meaning versus the form. And just to show the detail here, so you have that possibility of doing something very thin, and with the same tool, you can have something much thicker or extremely thick. And it continues, you know, and then you can do abstract ideas, symbols, things like that. And so, you know, when we show these things in general, you have, you know, you can do something that is completely legible, like here,
Right.
but you can do something completely not legible. Still, it's saying the same thing. And the splashes that you get here give you the contrast, the atmospheric environment, and the process that lets you say, okay, well, that's the interesting contrast that you're building with your story. And so, when you have gestural things like this, it gives you a different aspect. And now you can compare, well, this is very easy to read, this is not easy to read, but it's more interesting.
It's the same letters, right?
Exactly the same letters.
Aha.
It stops at A, B, C, D, F, G. So, but you can see the difference, the nuance, the contrast. And of course, we can do it at a much higher, bigger scale. And you can start, like, you know, if you want to write Sally, okay?
So when you're creating a work of art, how do you start? Is this how you would start, with the letters themselves, and you have a plan for it, or?
It depends. More often than not, when I'm doing a commission, it will start with like a quote. You know, someone has, well, I bring a quote, I need to talk about that thing. And more often than not, the quote will be in the piece, but not necessarily legible. You cannot necessarily read it. But it's there, and that's kind of the interesting aspect. Sometimes it's more research about a particular, you know, for example, an author or poem or poet or anything like that, and then you incorporate that into the story. And again, there is research that has to happen. But lettering, again, I can write the same Sally here in a way that you won't recognize it, but it will be maybe more interesting for you or for someone else. Let's give it a shot. So this is the S, this is the S. Well, maybe the A, I'm going to do something like that. That's the A for me. And then the double L, maybe I decide to do something like that. And the other one is a much smaller one, but much thicker here. And the Y will be maybe to complete kind of the, is just this. So now we have in the same page a traditional Sally, more or less, but a much more interesting, intriguing Sally that you have here that immediately you don't read it, but then when I tell you, you and you kind of like it because it has this
reminds me somewhat of graffiti a little bit.
Yes, yes, there is a lot of street art, if you like, in the process of lettering, and there's a lot of basically famous you know, street art pieces that have a lot of good calligraphic elements.
Oh yes, as well. Beautiful work.
Absolutely.
Well, you have this ink and paper work, but you also have some beautiful canvas work and some collage work that you've done, and you brought some images of a piece that you built. Let's take a look at that now.
Absolutely. So let's talk about this piece. This is a machine called Maquina Scriptura, and the idea behind it is talking about the, you know, in the old days, when you talk about the people who are, the monks who are writing and scripting and things like that, the scribes basically, we think they were great because they were the only guys at that time who know how to write. But the reality is they had very, very difficult times. They were working long hours, it was difficult for them to do the work, and so the idea here is their dream, the dream of the scribes, was to have a machine that would help them, that will create for them, that will scribe for them. And that's the process of a Maquina Scriptura. And so the idea is that what would that machine look like? So I started doing some sketching and ideas, and I got pieces, in fact, of, this is the collage we're talking about here, of metal that I incorporated into the piece. And you can see them here. This is, again, trial and error, a lot of ideas to put there. And then for each of the pieces, I will layer these pieces of metal that represent some sort of machinery, but at the same time letters cut in metal. and then you layer them one after the other in order to get that nice effect.
So do you cut the pieces of metal?
Yes. I built
Very
the pieces
interesting.
in metal. I basically write them on paper. I scan them on the computer. Then I cut them with a machine. And then I basically
Wow.
incorporate them into the canvas. And then the canvas itself is like multi-layers. So for each layer, as you can see, I would add things like basically epoxy resin on each layer so that there's a separation. And you can see, in fact, there are 6 layers in this piece at in the final piece.
All separated by resins.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, and this is almost, this is the process in place. And then it gives you the perspective. And you can see there's a lot of writing as well underneath the layers, in between layers, and within the pieces themselves. And that's the final piece. And to add, again, another mystique to that story, some of these small pieces of metal, in fact, I have added some pigments, kind of a glow-in-the-dark pigments behind the scene.
Oh,
so when you turn
interesting.
off the lights, the piece itself shows a little bit of glowing, and that glowing gives you the impression that these gears are moving. And that gives you even more
wow,
fascination.
interesting. With the layers and the
Yeah.
resin in between causes the light to show. Oh, very interesting. So show us some of the pieces that you created,
Yeah.
what these look like.
So these are the pieces that I cut. For example, this is an S, and you can look at it. And so the S itself is something that I drew first on a piece of paper. Then I, basically cut to the computer. That machine had me cut, and it's a piece of metal. This is an
So it's
M.
very thin,
Yeah,
sort of almost like foil, but
Yeah.
a little bit thicker.
A bit thicker than foil. This is an M, for example, and this is the M. I added like the glow-in-the-dark paint on the other side. And the process continues like this. There are different types of gears and ideas and things like that. And it gives you really an infinite possibility of playing with letters and shapes and gears to get the piece together.
And so what type of machine is it that cuts
It's a
it?
cutter. It's called a personal cutter.
Personal
Yeah.
cutter. Interesting. You can
Yeah.
cut lots of
Yeah,
different
you
substances.
can cut almost like instead of printing, you're cutting.
Oh,
And that's the
interesting. Wow. And so this is a piece that you made prior, but you are working on some new pieces now with a different kind of collage.
Yeah, I'm
so what
continuing
is
in
that?
the mixed media aspect, and my new series is called, in fact, it's called, for lack of a better term, because we're in Silicon Valley, it's called Silicon Ballet, which is Silicon Ballet instead of Silicon Valley. And what I took apart a bunch of computers, cut them into small pieces, and I'm incorporating pieces in canvases like this, so you can see pieces of the computer here, and I'm collaging them into the story. And this is, of course, work in progress here.
Okay.
But you can see some writing, and you can see the pieces of the computer here as well. So it gives you that nice combination with a nice layering here.
And so you have you start with a layer of
Yeah.
acrylic that's very textured, looks like.
Yeah, I start with a layer of acrylics and gesso as well, and then I add more paints, and then at one point I will add the piece and collage it, and then start doing some more writing, and that's kind of in the
Will
in the
this
middle of that
also get
process.
some resin as well, do you think?
I don't know.
Possibly?
Possibly.
Yeah, I like that layered with the glow in the dark.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yes.
Well, you have some other images, quite a few of them, of the other acrylic works that you've created. So let's take a look at those now and
Sure.
talk a little bit more about your process.
Yeah, so this one is, so the whole idea of my process is, again, doing some research, a lot of undeciphered scripts. So people sometimes look into, I need to read this, and sometimes they find things out, and then sometimes they come back to me and say, oh, Joe, we realize that we can read that piece, and that's great. Sometimes it's not meant to be read, but
Right.
again, it's the idea.
So is that script a particular script, or is that your own imaginary script?
No, this one is a particular script. This one is a combination of the Rongo Rongo script and the Indus script.
What's a Rongo Rongo script?
It's a script, again, discovered in fact, in the Easter Island.
Oh.
And we think, some people believe it's not a real script of just letters, but also it's a script for music. So it's a musical score, if you like. But we don't know. So I kind of incorporated a bunch of scripts into one piece that I called Bedtime Stories, imagining that would be a bedtime story for people to, in an undeciphered way. That was the idea of that, behind that piece.
And there's a kind of a mystical quality above your art.
Yeah, again, it's all about finding these scripts and making sure. The interesting thing about everything I do is that I write things, I layer on top of them, I relayer on top of them, I write something on. So each time you get closer and closer, you find new things, and you get more and more ideas about what's going on, and you can immediately realize that there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, they're beautiful. And then, so do you have an idea for them before you start, generally?
Absolutely. But the interesting thing, Sally, is that I never finish with the idea that I started with. I start with an idea, and I stumble upon many different things. I call them happy accidents, and then from there I go into more and more, you know, changing things, adding colors, removing colors, adding layers, and that's basically what makes the composition really interesting.
So the layers of paint and the layers of meaning, and it all has meaning to you personally.
Yeah.
Do you have stories about them?
Every single piece has a story. Every single has a story. Otherwise, it's not interesting. You know, there's a story for every piece, and sometimes the story is not complete. So I would have a piece in my studio stay for a while until I come back and then realize, okay, I know how to finish the story, and now I complete the piece.
Oh, interesting. Is it based sometimes on color as well, do you think?
Color helps a lot, but color also, the same color can mean different things for different people.
Right.
I've had a lot of people who come to my studio asking for a particular color, and they walk out with a piece that has nothing to do with the color they came in with. So it's typical.
So
our reaction to colors as a human, we think this is our favorite color, but sometimes we buy the things that have not at all the colors that we like. Yeah, and that's typical in the way we look at things.
The way we interpret words is different.
Yeah.
There's so many. I mean, people can say the same words and mean completely different meanings behind
Absolutely.
them.
Every single time you have a story, you have a word, people have different reflections, different ideas, different perceptions of the word, and that gives you a possibility of, you know, the very same piece may mean very different things for different people, and that's kind of the process that I follow all the time.
And what's prominent? Is it the color or is it the words? And
I wish I know. It's always a combination of both, in fact.
Right.
Color is something that I start with, but again, even colors, you have happy accident, and you sometimes realize that the combination of two colors that you never thought would be possible is working perfectly fine for a particular piece.
Right.
And you continue from there,
I agree with that.
and you add another piece of color, and sometimes one single, one color, just with a variation of that color within one piece would be very powerful for a particular piece. So the process itself is more interesting. And then when you add letters to that, you in fact invite the viewer to dive into this color and to try to read. But reading is not necessarily the ultimate goal.
Right.
Is the intrigue, is the way to look at the piece, and is the way to try to see, what do I look into this thing? What's the story behind that piece? Am I supposed to read this thing? Does that mean something? Is it upside down? That's the interesting.
And I would
piece.
imagine different cultures would look at the writing differently.
Absolutely.
As well.
I have pieces in which you can read it in different languages for different meanings. The very same letter itself, but just tilting it itself, it makes.
And you did that intentionally?
Not necessarily. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally. Sometimes, like, you have a piece that has a really writing, and you can, because the person wanted to have this poem incorporated in their piece. But sometimes it starts like this, but it ends completely differently, with a different aspect of things, with a different story. But again, the beauty of it, it lives with the person who has the painting, and it really makes them have a nice meaning into why they acquired that painting.
Very interesting. Calligraphy. Oh, I like that. Socrates calligraphy.
Yeah, and Socrates, for example, is one piece that has meaning because it's a lot of quotes about Socrates. This one, for example, is Voltaire. And Voltaire is, as you probably know, a French philosopher,
right.
poet, etc. He was kind of a special guy. He was an anti-establishment guy. And I looked at that. So the way I did this series of paints is about taking a poem or a poet or a famous person and try to incorporate, in fact, instead of doing their portraits, I would use their quotes and put their quotes into the piece.
There's a little bit of a portrait there, isn't there?
There is a portrait, just for people to remind them, but that's not the big thing.
That's
the big
not
thing
the,
is it.
Yes.
So one of the nicest quotes that I like from Voltaire is something that says, the secret to being a bore, the secret of being a bore is to tell everything. If you want to be a boring person, just tell everything. And it was a great story, because he was talking about, at that time, in that era, other poets were really going into excruciating details of explaining everything they do. So they don't leave any place for imagination. So people just think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He would advocate the opposite. Just give you one piece here, one piece there, and leave the person to interpret and imagine the thing in between. And that's the piece, what it looks like. When you look at it, a lot of people tell me, oh, I don't know what it means, but I love to learn more about it.
Right.
And that's kind of the objective behind that.
Well, interesting. That sort of reflects your whole process of art, because you have meaning and you have a lot of meaning into it, but it's not necessarily an obvious meaning or something that we can clearly read. But
and I like to be surprised. Many times, people come to me and said, I see something else in it, and I said, you're right. It's probably, what you see it's much more than I thought what I'm seeing in it.
Okay, interesting. So people have different interpretations.
Yeah.
Do people sometimes read
I have
words that you didn't write?
Yeah, many times. It's not. Many times they read things and they said, "I saw the name of my kids. I'm pretty sure I saw here 1, 2, 3 a friend." And yeah, sure.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, tell us a little bit about where people can see your art.
So I'm doing the Silicon Valley Open Studio. I occasionally do galleries. The best thing is to go to my website, rightfocus.com, and this is where I update basically occasionally which galleries I'm having exhibitions. And more lately, I'm trying to put more stuff on say Facebook. So my Facebook page is available as well for people to look. It's faster, easier for me to update. My website has a nice. It's a flash old website, but it has a navigation. You can walk into a gallery and you can see, in fact, all the pieces.
Oh,
in
nice.
A nice way
Very
of
interesting.
Navigating pieces.
And so if someone were to come to your open studios, what would they see there? Would you be doing demonstrations?
Absolutely. I spend the whole day demonstrating calligraphy, demonstrating lettering arts, demonstrating engraving. I can do the same thing that I showed you with a piece of pen and pencil. I can do the same thing with a Dremel bit and a diamond bit, and then a Dremel tool and a diamond bit, and engraving on glasses and writing calligraphy on glasses. So it gives people a lot of possibilities for playing with that, showing that, and I love it because it helps people expose and explore things that they don't usually have the opportunity to do.
Well, it's fascinating. I wish you luck at your studio. So thank you very much for being on TalkArt. This is a very, very interesting discussion about words and art and color.
Thank you, Sally.